This is The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours along the way, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. Hello, everyone. For today's episode, I talked to Rebecca Thorne, and you all are in for a treat because Rebecca is super knowledgeable about the publishing industry, and her path to publishing is so crazy and so fascinating. She started out pursuing traditional publishing for many, many years, but then she ended up finding huge success with self-publishing. And after that, the traditional publishers came knocking on her door. She now has 2 series being republished with the Big Five imprint tour. Rebecca is business savvy and prolific. And okay, I'm going to stop gushing and get to the episode. But before I do, I just want to let you all know 2 things. First is that I now have a Long Road to Publishing shop on bookshop.org. The link is in the show notes, and this is where you'll find all the books we've talked about on the podcast since episode 1. And if you purchase through Bookshop, you'll be supporting an indie bookstore, so please do check it out. The second thing is that The Long Road to Publishing was recently named one of the best podcasts about the publishing business, alongside some very big name podcasts like Manuscript Academy and The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. So that was very exciting. And thank you to Natalie Harris Spencer of Aspiring Author for the recognition. Of course, this is all the more reason for you to rate, review, subscribe, spread the word about the podcast so that everyone can listen to this show, aka one of the best podcasts about the publishing industry. And finally, on with today's episode, which I thought about calling Taking Control of Her Publishing Career, but because of Rebecca's Tomes and Tea series and her complete open book honesty, I am calling this episode Spilling the Tea on Self-Publishing Success. Rebecca Thorne is a USA Today, Indie, and Sunday Times best-selling author, specializing in all things fantasy, sci-fi, and romance. She's the author of the popular cozy fantasy quartet Tomes and Tea, and the sci-fi trilogy that begins with This Gilded Abyss. When she isn't writing, she's either working as a flight attendant or hiking with her lovely wife and their dogs. So, welcome to The Long Road to Publishing, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I was just rereading your bio this morning. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot you're a flight attendant. Do you get like free miles and get to travel on your own?"
We get trips that are typically 3 days long, and we usually work about 15 days a month. That's full time. And then as far as like the actual flight benefits go, it's any time there's an open seat on a plane of any airline, I can jump on that open seat for free. But then it comes down to the question of like, is there going to be room on that plane? It's a bit of a gamble. I have to choose when I'm going to use it. But yeah, the benefits are awesome.
Yeah. Do you ever travel to like get inspiration for your books that you're writing?
Sometimes I would actually say more inspiration comes from the people on my planes. I don't fly too much anymore. Like this started paying, so I kind of cut back on the flight.
Gotcha.
I've been a flight attendant for 12 years, almost 13. But yeah, I find more inspiration from the passengers on my plane more than anything. Like there's such a wide range of personality types that people are they're just so interesting to watch.
Oh, but also congratulations that you're making money from your books. That's like the dream.
I got my first royalty statement. I have officially earned out the Tomes and Tea series, and we did it 3 books in, and I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." I feel like someone needs to pinch me because it's like,
Yeah.
when it first happened, I was like, "Oh, like I better not quit my day job, right? Like don't ever quit your day job if you get a publishing deal because you never know if there's going to be more coming on the horizon, if you're going to do really well or if it's going to be like a one-hit wonder or if it's going to just flop out of the gate." So it's always a good idea to hold on to your job. And I am now at the point where I can confidently say that there is an opportunity for me pretty much every day. So
Yeah.
that's been really exciting.
Oh, that's so exciting. Yeah, well, okay. I cannot wait to get into the whole thing because I know it's going to be long. I did just want to say that I know you have a book being re-released on November 11th, This Gilded
Yes.
Abyss, which was originally
Mhm.
self-published. We'll get into
Mhm.
that, but it's being re-released. So do you want to just give a little elevator pitch to encourage people to go and check it out?
Okay, so I just heard the best elevator pitch from a lady named Cindy, and she works at a bookstore in Seattle. And she received the book, and there's a picture of the original indie cover on the inside because it was a really beautiful piece of artwork, and it's full color image on the inside. So it shows the two characters, and she said, "What do you think this book is about?" And Cindy took it, and she just goes, "Laura Croft, Tomb Raider, and a cruise ship director." And someone and the girl who's recording just goes, "Yeah, that tracks." Um, so basically, the pitch for it is that it is two women, enemies to lovers kind of vibe, and they go onto a submarine that basically experiences like a zombie apocalypse. So they're in like this Art Deco kind of world. They go onto this Titanic like luxury submarine to this underwater city to investigate a massacre, and then a massacre happens all around them while they're trapped on this submarine deep under the ocean. So it's very
Ooh.
yeah, it's very heart pounding. It's very if anybody has thalassophobia, I've been told it's not a good book for you. So maybe avoid it. But if anyone is coming from my cozy books, I always recommend they pay attention to the content warnings of this one because it is the farthest thing from cozy that you can get.
Okay. Well, and I have to say, the new cover is also gorgeous. I love the
Mm.
Art Deco look to it. It's so pretty.
I am obsessed. I had to push to change the cover for this one, and my publisher was like, "But we love the indie cover," and they're right. The indie cover is absolutely gorgeous. But I was kind of like, the problem is that a lot of people already owned the indie cover, and if we want this book to do well out of the gate, we have to do something different, or they're not going to buy it. I was excited to commission one of my friends to do the cover. She does like amazing artwork, and I think that she just knocked it out of the park. And the way that she set up that first cover, we can do basically all three in the series in that style, and it's going to look really, really cool. So she's
Yeah.
working on the second one now, and I'm like, oh.
Oh, exciting. Okay. Well, so here is where you are now, having these, originally indie published books coming out with your new publisher. We've also got the Tomes and Tea series. But let's go all the way back in time. When do you feel like you got serious about, I'm going to write books and get them published?
So I started writing at 11 years old, and I just kind of had fun dicking around through high school. I did actually self-publish a couple books in high school as like a 15 or 16 year
Oh,
old,
wow.
but it was like it wasn't anywhere anyone else could have grabbed. It was literally just for my friends for their birthday gifts. So I printed books, like lulu.com printed books for them.
Hmm.
And I do still have those copies, which is fun to look back on. But I got very serious about it my first year as a flight attendant. I went through college, I kind of took a break from writing, I became a flight attendant, and then I kind of looked at my job and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do this forever if I don't start writing now. So that was in 2013, I want to say.
Yeah, and so then do you want to tell us about like what was the manuscript that you wrote then and what did you do with it? And yeah, let's just go through kind of
Okay,
chronologically.
so 2013, I had written, I want to say like 8 books by then, but they were like high school fun, like not
Hmm.
real books, right? Like they were just like me having fun. And I think that was a really important time because I feel like because I had no expectations and I was just having fun with my work, I was able to develop this genuine passion and a writing routine that followed me through high school, college, and beyond. So I think that that was a very valuable time. I hear a lot of people like, well, what do I tell my child who wants to learn to write? I'm like, let them have fun, experiment with the things, write all the crappy tropes, right? Like put all the cliches into those books because once you get them out of your system, then you learn how to subvert
Mm.
those cliches later, right? So I think that was a very important time for me. And then once I started taking it seriously, in 2013, indie publishing was around, but it wasn't around in the capacity it is today. It was around in the redheaded stepchild. You couldn't hash it in traditional publishing, so you went indie capacity. And I still don't even know if that was really true, but that was the
Perception.
narrative that I was told, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So I pursued traditional publishing from 2013 until literally 2022, right? Like I was in there for 11 years or 10 years trying really hard to figure out what was going on. So And I say 2013, like I spent 2013 and 2014 focusing on writing a book that I thought would get published, and I was wrong. And then I wrote another one and I was wrong. And then I wrote another one and I was wrong. So my querying journey in that early phase of like the mid 2010s was 3 years long with three different novels, and I amassed 300 plus rejections over that time, right? Like
Yeah.
I never got a full request for my books until 2015. So it was like the
Wow.
very end of that journey, or 2016. It was like the very end of that journey. The third book that I wrote, I finally got serious. And the thing that tipped me over was learning that I needed to edit. I think in my brain, I was like, I don't need to fix it. It's perfect. And then I realized that like the competition for traditional publishing is so fierce that I had to elevate that book more, right? So I hired an editor for the first like 50 pages and I edited. And that was when I got my first full request, was when I actually edited the beginning and like learned, like I consumed every craft book I could between like 2014 and 2016. I read
Hmm.
everything. Like every craft book you can think of, I probably read. And that helped a ton as well because it was like all of a sudden now it wasn't me just having fun. It was me having fun with the knowledge that I needed to write something that could be presented to a wider audience. And
Yeah.
how does that look, right? And I got my literary agent. I actually was one of the first winners of a contest on Twitter called Rev Pit. And it
Oh,
was like,
yeah. Hmm.
yeah, so it was like an editorial contest where you basically submitted to editors and they offered you a free developmental editor, like edit, if you
Hmm.
won. And I won. And I got the free developmental edit, and then they did like a showcase of agents and, four agents. And I was picked by one of the agents. I was lucky enough to be represented by her for 4 years. And we went on submission with three different books or four different books, and only one of them sold. And the one that sold right around 2019 to a very small press in Minnesota.
Yeah. What book was that?
That one is called this. It was a middle grade book, and it was called The Secrets of Star Whales, and it is no longer in print.
Oh, okay.
Because yeah, because they offered me just $1,000 advance. It was so small, like, and I never earned out that advance. I never did. The money making point of my career, I only made like $700, and I mean, for context. I can make $700 working one 3 day trip at Southwest, right? So like
Yeah.
I worked for 7 years to get to that point, and I made less money than I would in a 3 day stint at my job, which is
Yeah. When you put
disheartening,
it
right?
that
Like,
way, it's like, oh my gosh. First of all, going back to just like you churning out novels in high school, like, I mean, there is something to that of like you just showed that you could write a whole manuscript.
but I'm holding up a book right now of the first one that I wrote, and it's so thin. It's like I
Yeah.
think this book was like 20,000 or 22,000 words, and then I wrote another one that was like maybe 30,000, and then there was another book that I wrote when I was 16, and that one was like a proper length. But I do think that that process of learning how to write that way was very helpful for me because it did help me understand sticking with a story from start to finish, which was something I struggled with when I was young. I had all these ideas, I kept flitting between them.
Hmm.
It was nice to have like sticking with the story from start to finish.
Yeah. And so then you started getting serious, you started writing, you started querying, realized that when you say you realized you needed to edit, did you also feel like at first you were like finishing the manuscript and being like, it's done. I don't need to like change anything like developmentally. Is
Yeah,
that, yeah,
basically.
okay.
Yeah. And one of the things that I realized is that the thing that was really holding me back at that period in time was that I didn't have a comprehensive knowledge of how plot structure works. So
Hmm.
like I had the characters, I had the banter, I had the dialogue, I had the formatting, right? Like my
Yeah.
edits didn't really need to be copy edits. Like I knew how to write, I knew how to format. The problem was that I didn't understand how a story worked. And I think it was because I had only ever been taught the three-act structure, and that
Hmm.
never really made sense in my brain. Even though I know it's prevalent in everything, I was like, how do I replicate that? I have no idea. So reading those craft books in 2014, 2015, 2016 was very helpful for me because I was able to basically understand how to break down the three-act structure into something that made sense in my brain. And I have a craft book now called The Five Sentence Method, which is basically the culmination of that understanding, right? So I plot now, and my plotting is 5 sentences long, and it is one sentence for every like section of a book. And there are like certain events that happen at those sentences. So if I plot out those sentences, I have a very comprehensive well-paced book that I can follow as like a timeline, and then I can fill in all the fun stuff in the middle. It was just like a craft book that I wrote a couple years ago over the Christmas season for fun because I had told people about this method and a lot of them were like, "Well, wait, that sounds really useful." And I was like, "Well, I'll just put it down on paper." Like nothing in that book is magnificently unique. It's just like it's all based. So like I pull a lot from like the plot points and Save the Cat. I mentioned a book often called My Story Can Beat Up Your Story by Jeffrey Scheichter, and I love that book. It's like a better version of Save the Cat, I think. So
Oh,
I
okay.
use that a lot. The snowflake method, which a lot of authors know about, is online, and I used a lot of those ideas basically to come up with the 5 sentences. And then I just kind of dived into how I the thing that I think was unique was not that I wrote these 5 sentences because they're everywhere in every single story if you know to look for them. But what was unique, I think, is that I tie those sentences to word count goals to monitor pacing.
So you read a whole bunch of craft books, kind of like smooshed them all together in your mind, and then came up with your own method, the 5 sentence method, which I'm not
Mhm.
much of a plotter. So I'm like, ooh, plotting a whole book in 5 sentences? That I'm gonna
Well,
have to
and that
read your
was
book.
literally me too. Like the reason that I learned to do that is because one of the books that I was trying to query with, I rewrote from scratch, 0 to 90,000 words 3 times. It was like over those, 3 or 4 years that I was querying, like I was trying so hard and I couldn't figure out why nothing I was doing was working because in my mind I was putting in a ton of work, but it wasn't work in a focused manner. It wasn't work in a
Mm.
direction that it needed to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that, a lot of times you'll hear people say like, "Oh, just keep writing, butt in chair, put in the time." But exactly what you're saying of like, if you're writing but with no direction or no understanding of story structure, like it has to be the writing time put in, but also the reading of craft books or the going to classes or the
Yeah.
getting feedback
The
from a developmental editor, you know.
Right. The community factor is huge. And I think that that's where I always tell writers to meet up with other writers because like editors are expensive, conferences are expensive, but you can talk to other writers for free
Yeah.
anywhere and
Yeah.
they will talk to you about what's going on and it gives you a better understanding of what you need to be doing to be competitive in a field that is very, very competitive.
Yes, yes, exactly. Okay, so yeah, so you did RevPit and you got the developmental edit, which I think RevPit is still happening.
I
It's
think they're
still
still
out there.
around. Yeah, they lost a bit of traction, I think, when Twitter kind of went
Hmm.
weird, and everybody migrated. So they've been starting to get established. I think the place that they settled is Reddit.
And then you got an agent from the agent showcase through
Yeah.
RevPit. So then you went on submission with I love when you talk to authors and they've had a long journey and they're like, then we went on submission with like 4 or 5 manuscripts. It's like it gets so like long
Uh-huh.
you can't even remember,
Yeah,
you
no,
know?
genuinely. Like I think that it's funny because everybody thinks that getting an agent is like, I made it, I did it. And it's like, no, you literally just got handed your baton and you're in the race now. Like they
Yeah.
they put they put a number on your chest and let you start at the starting line. Like that's all that happened. And that's
Yeah.
frustrating because you spend so many years just trying to get to the fin or to the starting line that like you don't even realize how much longer it is after that point. Like traditional publishing is such a slog.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor though, because it's like you're training just to qualify for the race.
And I guess if you think about like higher end sports, it's kind of the same thing. Like Olympian, gold medalists they worked very, very hard, but they also were probably very lucky in their biology, their, physiology, right? Like the way that they are able to train helps, but like they had to have some base level of like not everybody can qualify to be a gold medal Olympian,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I think that that's kind of how it is too. Like you can do everything you want and everything you think will help you as the writer. And then it comes down to the luck of what you're writing, who's reading it, and how well you tell that story. It doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It just means that whoever was reading your stuff right now is not necessarily vibing with your type of writing. And
Right.
that sucks because there's nothing you can really do to change that after a certain point. That's
Yeah.
just kind of it.
Yeah, and I was actually, I can't remember where I saw this, but just the other day I saw something that was like, when you're, let's say, on submission and you're getting feedback from editors that say, like, I just didn't connect with the voice, that's not really feedback that you can do anything about, nor should you do anything about because
Genuinely
it's
that.
It's
Mhm.
just like they weren't vibing with it, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to keep going and try to hope for an editor that does vibe with it, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think that one of the biggest travesties that I've noticed as I've gotten more popular is that I've met a lot of authors, and a lot of them are wonderful, wonderful people. And then there are some that are they think that they succeeded because they deserved it, because they worked hard, because like that's the American fallacy, right? Like
Right.
you can work your ass off and you still won't make it. And
Yeah.
then you get lucky one day and you will, and it's just, but you can't predict that. I equate it to, I think Travis Baldree was the one who first said that it's like putting lightning rods out in the field and hoping one of them gets struck. And like you can have somebody who puts out one lightning rod and they get this massive strike of lightning right off the bat. And then you can have somebody in the next field over who has planted 600 lightning rods and none of them got lucky enough to be struck. And that is not a failing on their part. It just means that, like they're out in the field, which is an important thing. Like if you're sitting in your car, you're never going to get struck by lightning. But like at the same time, you just never know what it's going to be. Like it's like this beautiful compilation of hard work, stamina, perseverance, and then that luck.
Yeah. So then you finally sold this middle grade novel to a
Yeah.
small publisher.
Yep.
And yeah, so then tell me what happened next.
That was a very disappointing experience for me. We sold the book, it came out over the pandemic. And what was frustrating to me is like, I realized very quickly that it doesn't matter who the publisher matters, but what matters more is whether or not they're refilling distribution channels, right? So the first day that that book came out, my best friend went to our local Barnes and Noble. We found them there. She bought both copies the day of, and they never restocked those copies. And
Oh
I
my
was like, oh.
gosh.
So then they're telling me that, like, oh, yeah, your book never earned out. You barely sold, I think I sold like 1,200 copies of that book total. And they were just like, yeah, your book didn't really perform the way we were hoping. And I'm just like, my book didn't perform the way you were hoping. You never restocked my book in stores. So, of course, no one else could buy it
And this
because it
was the
wasn't
Barnes and
physically there
Noble in your town,
in
correct?
my hometown.
So it's
Yeah.
like
So,
you might think that a lot of people in Rebecca's hometown might want to go buy her book and that
right?
it's
You
not
would think that.
there.
Yeah. No, my best friend bought both copies and I went back week after week after week looking for it. And I asked people, where is it? Where is it? Well, we can order it for you if you buy it. And I'm like, why didn't they restock it? And it's just, and granted, middle grade is a very difficult sell. I think it's something like seven middle grade authors own like 90% of the market share. So middle grade is a very difficult genre to break into anyway, unless you have an established name. And the publisher never restocked the books.
Yeah,
So
that's
tell me why
frustrating.
it never sold, right? Like the distribution wasn't there. So I kind of looked after all of those years. And then we tried to sell a couple more books on submission and none of them sold. And by 2022, I kind of got to the point where I was just like looking at this experience and feeling so crappy because I was like, I have spent so much time letting other people dictate my career. And that was kind of where I ended up. Like, I looked at my career and I was like, I have no control. And I have had no control since I went into traditional publishing back in 2014. Every moment, I'm waiting for someone to say yes to me. And then in 2022, I found Legends and Lattes. And it blew my mind because I had always been told that indie publishing could not get into Barnes and Noble. And I found that indie book in March of 2022 in a Barnes and Noble on prominent display, right? Front page, like cover out, and I walked up to it and was like, oh my God. And I'm a nerd. So I picked it up and I flipped inside and I was like, oh, I saw this book on TikTok. I picked it up, I flipped inside, and I saw that it said Cryptid Press. And I was like, the hell is Cryptid Press? I've never even heard of them. And I thought I knew everybody at this point, right? Because we've been on submission for so many years. So I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
know all the publishers. And I was like, what is Cryptid Press? So I looked it up and it is his personal LLC. That was the basically
Ah.
like his quote unquote publishing house, even though it was just his LLC that he published under. And then he added that little icon to the inside to make it look a little more, legit, right?
Hmm.
Someone who's not discerning might genuinely think that was a real publisher. But what broke my brain was that that was the moment that I was like, oh, indie books can make it if they're popular enough. And
Yeah.
then I started doing this deep dive into what indie had become. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh my God, there's like actual pathways to get into bookstores. There's people making full-time salaries and they get paid in 60 days instead of 3 years. Like it blew my brain. And then I looked at Legends and Latte specifically and saw that Tor had bought that book in like I just happened to find that book in a Barnes and Noble in like the 3 week period. And there's the luck, right? Like
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
thing you can't control. That's the lightning strike. Like I found that book in the 3 week period that it was out as an indie book, and then they pulled it from every shelf. And they kept it out until 6 months later when it was re-released traditionally because Tor bought that book in like 24 hours. And Tor does not
Wow.
buy books in 24 hours, right? Like I had been around long enough to know that Tor does not buy books that fast. And I also knew that if they were buying something that fast, it's because they saw something coming like a freight train and they wanted to be on the forefront of it. And I was like, well, if they think cozy fantasy is the next play, I loved this book. I would write really well in this genre. And frankly, I'm tired of where I'm at right now. Like I'm tired of beating my head against a wall, begging to be led into a room that I feel like I qualify to be in. So I left my agent in April. I read that book in March. I left my agent in April and I wrote that book. I plotted it in May and I wrote it over June and July in 6 weeks. And that was Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. So
Wow. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
so I was like, if I can self-publish this book, and my literal plan was if I self-publish this book, I'll release it 1 month before his book re-releases. And that will give people enough time to find the indie version so that when everybody buys Legends and Lattes, they might say, well, what else is out there like it? And there really isn't anything because it was the brand new in a genre.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was like, maybe I'll be the diversion to his Hunger Games. Like if I can get my book out fast enough and it's good enough and enough people know about it, it will become the most recommended book next to Legends and Lattes. And that was pretty much exactly what happened over that holiday season, which was wild. So
Incredible.
that's the luck again, right? Like it
Yeah.
was lucky that I found that book in a Barnes and Noble. It was lucky that that strategy worked out because timing the market never works out for people. Like I do not recommend you try to time the market, but for that moment, it worked out for me.
Two questions. One is what genre were most of the books that you were going on submission with traditionally with your agent? Were those mostly fantasy and sci-fi?
Fantasy.
Okay, so then, all right, so then, yeah, so then you're at Barnes and Noble, you see Legends and Lattes, which you know is a self-published book, but then you look and you're like, oh, like, and I agree with you that I think a lot of people, like we authors, are more trained to be like, oh, like we can tell the difference between what's a big five and what's not. But
Hmm.
your average reader, I don't think they
They have no
know.
idea.
I don't
They
think
don't
they
even know who the
care.
publishers are.
Yeah, like if I said, if I said, oh, like Rebecca's published by Tor, like I would say most readers are like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah.
They wouldn't know, is that a big five or not? And it
Right.
is, but so anyhow, okay, so then you were like, wait a minute, this is very interesting. Maybe this is something I could do. And then my question now is, I've heard of cozy mysteries, but
Hmm.
how would you describe a cozy fantasy? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So cozy fantasy, and it's been out forever. I mean, like there are cozy fantasies that you can track back 30 years or more. The difference is that Legends and Lattes created the genre template for it. So before that point, before Legends and Lattes, the words cozy fantasy crammed together did not exist. And even though you can find books now from the past that will fit very nicely in this genre, it's important to remember that genre overall is just a way to sort books in a bookstore, right? Like when you
Hmm.
physically walk in a bookstore, genre is the marketing tactic of putting books in a certain category so that readers can find them and booksellers know what they are. So the
Hmm.
category of cozy fantasy did not exist, even if the themes of cozy fantasy did. And that was kind of what was instrumental. I think that cozy fantasy came at a time when I think the reason it went so popular was because everybody was looking for that type of book at that point. Like we were coming off the pandemic, we had all been very isolated. One of the big tropes in cozy fantasy is found family. Like I would argue that's like the only consistent trope in cozy fantasy these days. Like you're going to find a really good community inside cozy fantasy, and it's going to make you feel like you're home. And that is something that most people did not have after the pandemic because we were all isolated from our friends, from our communities. No one could see each other. So it makes sense to me that on the heels of that, this genre exploded. And I think it is important to, again, pay homage to Legends and Lattes and how that tagline that he put on the front of his book, high fantasy with low stakes.
Hmm.
That is that tagline was printed on the very front of his book. That tells every single person who picks it up what that book is about. Like in the same way that I think like if you look at Gideon the Ninth, I think the reason that became so popular is because of the tagline lesbian necromancers in space, right? Like
Yeah.
Like, I think that was what drove the majority of people picking up that book. They're like, oh, that sounds great. And then they buy it, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that that's what Legends and Lattes did, but to a higher extent. I think that that high fantasy with low stakes basically became the defining feature of the genre because ultimately that was the thing that made booksellers be like, oh, I know what that is. I can sell that because I know what that is. I know what category that fits in, and I know what kind of readers are looking for that. And the answer is everybody because of the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess I'm thinking because like cozy mystery is usually like, not graphic violence. There's like the murders happen off stage and
Yeah.
there's yeah, like banter and found
Lighthearted. Yeah.
lighthearted humor. So I'm guessing
Hmm.
with cozy fantasy, sort of the same. There's humor, there's banter, there's maybe a romance plot. There's maybe
Yeah.
not a lot of like it's definitely not a Game of Thrones situation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like the fantasy setting in cozy fantasy is more of a vehicle to drive the plot rather than the purpose of the plot.
Hmm.
Like the politics will happen, but they're going to happen off screen in a lot of cases. And this is actually where I think my books differ. I started writing Treason to be like Legends and Lattes, but as I kept writing the quartet, my goal shifted from mimicking Legends and Lattes and being categorized as cozy fantasy into mirroring Tamara Pierce and like the way that I read those quartets as a kid, right? So like her quartets felt very cozy to me. In hindsight, they're genuinely they feel so cozy to me still because they're like a comfort read for me, but
Hmm.
they're not cozy in the plot. Like there's action, there's fighting, there's politics, there's drama, there's stakes. But it still felt very cozy because of the communities that she created inside those books. So I started with Legends and Lattes. I added them creating a shop so that there would be no question that like Legends and Lattes is opening a coffee shop. My book is opening a tea shop, right? Like there's
Yeah.
no question that that's the same thing. But then as you keep going through, it's like they leave their shop in book two and they're doing pirate stuff on a river for like an entire book. And then they come back and they get married, but then there's a coup to overthrow a vicious queen, and that's
Yeah, yeah,
political.
yeah.
And then in book four, there's a little bit of like a plot of tourism, right? Like how does their, super successful tea shop and bookstore affect the small town that they set up shop in when people start to come visit it because it's a destination now? How does that
Hmm.
affect the plot? But then there's also this huge underlying plot of like alchemy and elemental magic and how they interplay together. So it got very dramatic by book four. Like the
Yeah.
ending of this book was a very dramatic fight scene. But I think that because it started with those cozy, familiar vibes of Legends and Lattes and then evolved into something new, I do think that it can bridge two different types of genres at that point. Like I think it's
Right.
solidly fantasy by the end. But it has enough cozy vibes to keep the cozy audience interested. So it really kind of goes back and forth, which was my goal. So,
Yeah, this is fascinating. So you were very strategic. You were like, I'm going to self-publish something very similar to Legends and
mhm.
Lattes and
Yep.
get it out. Well, tell me a little bit about your experience self-publishing. I mean, it seems like you figured it out pretty quickly to get it out
Yeah.
so fast.
Yeah, I was lucky because I was already on TikTok. January of that year is when I logged onto TikTok. One of our professors, who was he is actually a head acquiring editor at Disney's Press, and he was teaching a class at Emerson College at the time that I was there in 2022. And he literally told us on like day one, he was like, if you guys are not on TikTok, you're sleeping because publishers don't know what to do with TikTok. Now, I don't think that's quite true anymore, but in 2022, that was the truth. Like TikTok came, it exploded onto the scene. It is a huge driving factor behind indie sales. Romantasy authors, romance authors, thriller authors, contemporary authors, every kind of author was able to get some kind of traction because of book talk. And it was basically this collective reasoning where readers as a whole were like, we want good books. We don't want the books that publishers think will be good books. We want good books. We want books that have plots that we want. And indie authors are able to pivot into that much faster, right? So
Mhm.
traditional publishers, like they have 3 years of prep before a book even hits the shelves. By that point, it's already over. Indie authors can put out a book next week. That
Right,
is that, right?
right,
Like
right.
it was a different kind of vibe. So when I was doing that, I was on TikTok, ingrained in this indie scene, ingrained in the book talk scene. And I asked people, I was like, what do I do? And luckily, Travis Baldree published a how-to self-publish based on Legends and Lattes. And he wrote it in like early 2022 after he put out Legends and Lattes. And then he added an addendum like, hey, this book got published by a big press, but this was how I did it initially. And he literally went, I mean, he went step by step. It's called Self-Publishing A to Z on Medium. That's where it was published. And it's by Travis Baldree. And it is literally like a comprehensive step-by-step breakdown of everything that you
Oh,
needed to do to
amazing.
self-publish. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I literally pulled that up and followed his publishing strategy to the letter. Like I published Treason the exact same way he published Legends and Lattes. The only difference is that he was on Twitter and I was on TikTok.
And I haven't looked at your book to see. Did you create like a little LLC like name for your publishing company like he did?
I didn't actually. I have an LLC, but I didn't actually use it to like publish anything. I published under my name.
Okay.
And I just did that for simplicity's sake, I guess. Like
Hmm.
I don't know. It seemed like one extra layer for me, like oh, creating a an icon, creating a publisher, and like a website. You didn't even need a
And you
website to it,
had
but
a
like
timeline you were trying to stick
I had a
to. So,
timeline. Yeah, so I wrote that book in June and July in 6 weeks, and I literally was able to basically promote it while I was writing it. So like every day I was posting about how I was going to put this book out, how I was going to put this book out. And then once I finished writing it, I was like, it's done. And everyone's like, yay, because like they've been watching it, right? And then when I moved into the publishing side, it was like, all right, let's go through like the woes of publishing. And I made so many missteps and it was relatable, right? Like now I'm doing ARC copies. Who wants an ARC copy? Because people have been following for 3 months. They were like, me, you know. I was like, now I'm doing ISBN purchases. Oh my God, I messed up the ISBN purchases. Here's how I messed up, right? Like it was like constant. And then once I released the book, I started doing publishing numbers, right? So like I would record my sales as like sales updates and I would be like, here's how much money transparently I made this week off of this
hmm.
book. Here's how much money I made this week. So a lot of my readers got to actually watch, like I had a pretty decent launch, a very good launch objectively for a new indie author who'd never been known. And then they got to watch over the next 2 months as my sales climbed and climbed. And then by the time the Christmas season came around and people were looking for copies of something, my sales like skyrocketed. Like I doubled my sales in December compared to November. And it was like on a steady incline before that point anyway. But
And were you doing all of this on TikTok, like all of the kind of
yeah,
updating everything? Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
all the sales updates are on TikTok. They're actually still there. I had them in a like one of those little like playlists of sales
Hmm.
updates, and I did them until March of 2023, which was right around the time that Tor was buying the book. And I stopped doing it because I hit $10,000 a month in sales. And
Wow.
I was for 2 books. And I was just like, I don't think it's helpful anymore. Now it feels like bragging,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
after a certain level, it's like this isn't helpful. But like I do think in the beginning it was very useful for people. And I think that actually did get a lot of people interested in that book because they were watching me as a writer putting this stuff out and seeing, and
yeah.
I could see that going the opposite way, right? Like if I'd published and there weren't good sales, I think people would have gotten depressed and like moved away, right? Like there is an
Hmm.
image that you need to keep as an author, depending. So I don't recommend everybody reveal their sales, but for me at that purpose and time, like I was like, at the very least, I'm going to have self-published a book because I wanted to be able to teach how to self-publish in classrooms someday. And my goal was like, maybe I'll make a couple $100 extra a month to move out of my parents' house and then it just like exploded.
Yeah.
And by January of 2023, after that holiday season, I was already getting publishers emailing me, which was a wild transition after so many years.
Yeah. And well, and this was why, because I knew that this was part of your story, and it must feel so crazy to be like, and now, like now I know you were agented and on submission for what, like 8 years. Before that, like
Yeah.
3+ years of querying. All of these years where you said, you're basically like, please, someone like give me a book deal. And then you do it yourself. You publish
Yeah.
it yourself, and now you have the publishers coming to you. Like, what a
They
wild
were
turn.
they were like, yeah, it was genuinely one of those moments where I kind of looked around and all of a sudden I was the hot thing that I had been trying to be for so many years. Like I feel like the minute I stepped away from the glass was the minute everybody else was like, wait, like
Hmm.
and it was very weird to me. Like it started very slowly where like I got a book box in the UK that made me an offer. And at the same time, literally, and this is the luck, right? Like the same day that I got an email that they were going to make me an offer for this UK book box, I got an email from a literary scout. I'd never even heard of those. And I'd been in the industry for 9 years at that point, right? Like I'd
Yeah,
never even
yeah.
heard of what a literary scout was, but apparently they match domestic, like US books with foreign presses.
Uh-huh.
So she emailed and was like, I would love to take your book abroad and find some publishers for it. And I was like, I don't even know what you do. I would feel more comfortable with a literary agent. And she was so nice. She was like, no worries, I know the best one. And she connected me with my current agent. And I literally, so like that happened. I got the email from the press on Tuesday. I got the first email from her on Tuesday. By Thursday, she told me she was going to connect me with an agent. By Monday morning, I was represented by that agent. Like we had
Wow.
one phone call and she was like, I'll offer rep. And I was like, perfect. And then I handed her the offer that I had gotten on Tuesday the week before. And she took that offer because she was a foreign agent. She took that offer in the UK and leveraged it into a four-house auction. And Tour UK won that.
Wow. Oh my
That's the luck,
goodness.
right? Like that's the luck because like I could have just gone with this smaller book box and probably not had any of the success that I currently have, right? Or I could have ignored it entirely and stayed indie and I probably would have made a lot of money, but I would not have been as widely known as a household name, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the difference between indie and trad. Like some indie authors do make it that big, but it's rare. Trad is known for putting books in every single store in the country. People will see your books, but there's still a lot of question about whether or not you'll get that kind of notoriety even through trad because there are different levels of publishing deals all over. But when UK bought in, I asked my agent, I had actually another offer received a couple weeks later from a US press, Barnes and Noble's press. I handed it to her and she was just like, I don't deal in the US. Like I'm a foreign agent. I do sales abroad. And I was like, I know. And so she tried to hook me up with some US agents and I interviewed them and didn't really like them. And I was like, so I went back to her and I was like, I understand what you're saying. And I think you'd still do a great job. Like, will you represent me domestically? And she was like, where do you want me to take you on submission? And I was like, I don't want to go on submission. I want to use this offer to leverage Tor US to get on board. And remember how I said Tor doesn't make deals in 24 hours? They made me a deal in 24 hours.
Dang, look
So,
at you.
like, it was, but like, that's the thing. Like, that's the luck, right? Like, I
Yeah.
knew enough about the industry because I'd been involved in the industry for so long. And I had an agent and people interested who were willing to make that deal happen, right? Like, there's a lot more power that I had with this deal, but at the same time, it would not have happened that way for many people,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Wow, this is incredible. And I just have to say that you seem, I mean, clearly talented writer, but also talented business mind here because like very strategic, very, you're like, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna use this to leverage to our US. I mean,
I think one of the things that I learned over the time that I had been in, traditional spaces begging to be let in, the books that got really good offers were the ones that had hype around them. And you can generate hype as an author, but at a certain point, if you're not ready to take advantage of the hype that has been generated, right, the book will fall. And because like the amount the publishers offer always depends on how excited they are about the book. It
mhm,
doesn't matter what the book is. It doesn't matter what the plot is. It doesn't matter how successful the author is. How excited are they about the book? And that can come back to bite you in the ass later because if you have a very successful book that there's a lot of hype around and they're super excited and they throw huge money at you, right? Like multiple six figures, and then your book flops. Now there's no hype, there's no excitement for the next series. So then your
right.
career dies after one series. Like you may have gotten this stellar deal. Like I know authors that have had $500,000 for their book advance, and then their book sells 20,000 copies and they never earn out. And it's like, and then when they try to go back to that publisher, the publisher's like, bro, we're in the red with you, like
Right,
it's not
right.
worth it. And then when
Yeah.
they try to go to other publishers, all the other publishers are like, yeah, we heard that book didn't do so well. So, like, even if you're an established author, if you have one flop, it's so hard to get back up to that moment of hype. Whereas if you can maintain the hype, you can continue growing the hype. And that's what's kind of crazy is like now that I'm at this level, I can see how successful authors can make themselves even more successful in an exponential rate. And if you get past that threshold, things keep going up for you, which is wonderful. But if you don't get past that threshold, God, you are back at the bottom. And it
Mm,
happens so fast. And there's
yeah.
nothing you can do about it, you know? And that's where, like, indie to me is such a powerful place for authors right now because as an indie author, all you need are readers. That's it. And if your readers liked your first book, they'll like your second book. They don't care
Yeah.
how the sales numbers did. They don't care what the advance number was. there's no advance, right? Like they look at a book that comes out from an author they liked and they buy the next one. And that is as simple as it is in indie. So there are ways to get people, more and more readers. And I think that that again is still an exponential growth. Like once you get certain readers, they start talking about your book. Now all of a sudden that goes up exponentially because everybody's talking about your book without your input. And that's the place to be for marketing purposes.
Right. Then you're not having to do all the effort because other
Right.
people are talking
Other
about it
people
for
are doing it.
you.
Yeah, like that's the
Right.
street team that they all talk about. And it's hard when you're brand new because if there's no hype around your books, even from a reader standpoint, like, so for example, one of the ways I generated hype with Treason and all indie books after that, I would open up a form and I would say, please apply to be an ARC reader. And I'd have all these questions. And I would open it up for 24 hours, right? Like limited time period. Here's how long you have to sign up to be an ARC reader for me. And at the end of it, I would hand the book to every single person who filled out that form.
Yeah.
But I made it seem like it was exclusive, right? Like I made it seem like I was choosing carefully who my ARC team would be. But the answer is that the more people who are talking about my book, the better for me as an indie author. So it was strategic, but also like secretive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
I
No.
didn't want people to just think that anybody could get it. But the fact of the matter was, if you found it in 24 hours, anybody could get it.
I mean, again, you seem very business savvy because it's like the supply and debate, like make it seem like
Hmm.
it's exclusive and then people get more excited about
Yep.
it. And
Because of the way that our minds have been trained with social media, if you cannot create that hype, like I'm super lucky right now. I got into TikTok at the right time. And that is
hmm
not the case anymore. You cannot start TikTok the way that I started TikTok back then. So, like, people ask me to come in and do social media talks all the time, like, oh, teach us how you did social media. And I'm like, the way I did social media is dead. You can't do it that way anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
you gotta
there's
be on the lookout for the next thing, I
right, you've got to be
guess.
on the lookout for the
Yeah.
next thing, but like even that's going to go away soon. And now we're seeing this huge shift where people are disconnecting purposely because they're tired of the algorithm controlling their lives. So people are not online as much as they were before, which means we have to get even more creative about the ways like they're not on social medias. They might be browsing the internet, they might be on Reddit, but they're not on TikTok, they're not on Instagram in a lot of ways. There's a huge movement off of those social platforms. And how is that going to change in the next 5 years? I have no idea. And then we're seeing right now all these publishers realizing like my book was kind of like right around the time that publishers started realizing indie authors are making a ton of money and
And
they're
they're
not getting
like,
a piece of that
ooh,
pie,
we
right?
need to get
Like,
some.
yeah,
Yeah.
like wait, we need more money. Oh my God, they're not making a piece of that pie. So grabbing those indie books back then was like weird. But like traditional publishers didn't go indie. They didn't look at indie books. And then they realized that they were missing out on tons and tons. And like the publishing deals I have heard from some of my author friends who started indie, they're not royalty based. They're like, they get to negotiate everything. Like, they're not royalty based the way, oh, this is the standard royalty. No, because like indie authors who are super, super successful, and I'm talking like ridiculously like popular indie authors who go trad, they go trad for a reason because they're already making tons and tons of money off of their 80% or 70% royalties with Amazon. So the publisher has to make that deal worthwhile to get a
Right.
piece of that pie.
Right.
So when you look at the power that indie authors have, if you get to that point, you have so much more control. And then I think too, one of the other things that I've noticed as an indie author who came in, and I'm nowhere near those levels, but like as an indie author who came in, my publisher trusts me in a lot of ways that my old publisher did not, right? Like I did not get
hmm
a say on my cover for that small press back in 2019. I did not get a say on the edits. I did not get a say on the marketing strategy. They come to me now and they're like, what do you think of this cover? Thoughts, right? Like
Yeah.
Gilded Abyss's cover changed because I said we need a new cover for marketing purposes. And here's the reason why. And
Yeah.
here's why I think it's equally important to add the indie cover back into the book somewhere because people love that image, right? Like I had all this data because I'm online, because I talk to my readers on social media. I was able to basically do polls and ask people and then show the comments. Right. And so
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
they listen to that a lot more than they would have with the normal author because they know that I'm ingrained in my marketing strategy. Like I am equally invested.
Yeah, that is very interesting because that was going to be one of my questions is like, do you feel like they treat you differently because you came from this indie background? And it sounds like yes, but in a good way. You got the literary agent and then the deal with Tour UK and then the deal with Tour US. just off of the first book in the Tomes and Tea series. Is that right?
So this was weird. I had already published because I was planning a rapid release schedule before publishers got involved. So I published Treason in September of 2022, and I had already written Pirates over that holiday season, and I published it in February of 2023. So like I had publishers interested in January, but I went ahead and published Pirates anyway because I didn't know if that anything was going to come from that, and I had told my
Right.
readers to expect it. So I moved on before anything was inked. I moved on and I published the book. And then they pulled both of them in July of that year.
When they had bought the rights to it, they pulled the indie versions. And
Yeah.
I guess so my other question too is and we know that you saw Legends and Lattes at Barnes and Noble, which is unusual to see a self-published book
Hmm.
at Barnes and Noble. Were any of your self-published books getting into bookstores?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, by
Okay.
that holiday season. And this is where I kind of realized like when it talks to, when we talk about indie books going into bookstores, it's all about the booksellers who buy those books. And one of the other things that I think was very important is that first off, Barnes and Noble gave back the purchasing power to each individual store. So they are able to choose which books they stock inside their store rather than it being a standard across the board. Some executive chooses everything. Every individual store has purchasing power based on their location and what's selling, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So that means that every bookseller at Barnes and Noble who sees your book online can go to their manager and say, I saw this book on TikTok, it's trending, I think we can sell it. And the manager buys the book, right? And
Okay.
that's how that works. And then at the same time, parallel to that, we saw over 2020, a bunch of people left their day jobs, they left their corporate jobs, and they opened bookstores. Like the book that I wrote was happening in real time, and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so, like a lot of these people left their day jobs, they started their dream. They opened bookstores, 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 right? So, all these indie bookstores are now competing with Barnes and Noble. All of those indie bookstores have purchasing power to decide what goes on their shelves. And all of them were on TikTok. Why would they not stock those books in their stores?
And again, we were talking about kind of like this narrative about self-published books is like the thing you always hear is, oh, well, you can self-publish a book, but good luck ever getting it into a bookstore. But
Right.
clearly,
Not true.
that's
Not
not
true anymore.
true.
When we talk about this and like indie books being in bookstores, there is a bookstore that just opened, and I think it's in New York, but I saw it on TikTok. I saw it on TikTok,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They just opened and they are only stocking indie books. That is already a huge shift because
Yeah.
5 years ago, a bookstore that is only stocking indie books would have been unheard of. And now
Hmm.
that's all that they're going to stock. And that's massively insane. Like for example, I went to one of my local bookstores in 2022. It was like right before Christmas 2022. And I asked him, I was like, hey, my book's doing really well. It's selling a lot of copies. I think you guys can make money off of it. Please stock it in your store. And they were like, fill out this form and we'll get back to you. And they got back to me 3 months later. And we're after I was already in talks with Tor. And they were just like, yeah, we don't have the shelf space. After Tor bought it, they stocked it and they
Mm.
called me back for a signing, right? Like, and that was just one of those moments where I was kind of looking and I'm like, do you even remember that I asked you as an indie author and now
Yeah.
you're interested? Like I never forgot that. They did, but I didn't.
Right.
I still showed up
Well,
and I smiled, but it was kind of like, huh. Hmm.
and I guess that is something to keep in mind for people going the indie route is like you are going to get some of that.
There's the stigma is still there, but it's
Hmm.
getting better.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
but what is interesting is that I actually think that the acquisition of indie books over time, I think is actually going to change the querying space for traditional publishing. Like I'm not even sure querying in its current form is going to exist in 5 years. I really don't.
Ooh.
I think what we might start to see, if it does exist, it's going to get way, way smaller. I think what we might start to see is bookstore or publishers moving into acquiring proven indie books instead of querying. Because you got to think about it. I mean, when you watch like Shark Tank, the first question out of their mouths is, what are the sales? How
Hmm.
much money has it
Hmm.
made? What's the profit, right? Publishing is the only industry where we acquire items on hype,
Right.
on the idea that it's going to sell. Maybe, hopefully, we're going to take a gamble, right? And if you look at the way that these big publishers make money, it is like it's something like 90% of the sales are driven by like 2% of the books, right? Like
Right.
the really,
Right.
really big sellers, the Stephen Kings, you know,
Dan
Sarah J.
Brown.
Maas's, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the Dan Browns. Those are the ones who are going to be driving the majority of book sales. And then they buy all these other books basically to just be like, look, we published this kind of book. And maybe they get lucky with one of them, right? when you have indie books that have a proven audience and they have sales numbers to boot, like you as an author have more negotiating power, but then they're going to come in with an offer that is appropriate to the sales of that book. So when they bought Gilded Abyss, they offered less than Tomes and Tea because I had better sales for Tomes and Tea than I did for Gilded Abyss. And I had no real negotiating power to be like, wait, it's worth more, which is
Yeah.
fine by me because I'd rather have royalties. Like I think this book will earn out very quickly because of the
Yeah.
amount that they offered for it, and that's fine. But at the same time, like it can be a double-edged sword where they're like, well, we saw it only made this, so we're only going to offer this. But then if it goes massively big with their distribution levels, suddenly now you're earning out, you're getting royalties a lot faster. And most authors in traditional spheres right now don't earn out because they're offered so much up front that they never have a chance, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So
You were self-publishing and like getting really good success like right away. And so was there sort of a debate in your mind about going with a traditional publisher, or were you part of you thinking, should I just stick with what I'm doing and keep self-publishing?
yeah, the offers that I was getting from those initial publishers, I was like I'm making $10,000 a month. You're not going to entice me with
Right.
$40,000. Like I can literally earn that out in 4 months and keep my rights, you
Right,
know?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, like it didn't make sense to me. And if, you talk to some other indie authors, like I know authors that have kept their ebook rights and, and they're just like, yeah, the publisher would have to offer me an astronomical amount of money to get the
Mhm.
ebook rights because I'm making so much that they would have to pay that on the back end to make it worth my while. So there was that question for me about that. But the problem was that I had spent 8 years looking at Tor specifically because they're the biggest science fiction fantasy imprint in the world. And they publish all of my favorite books. When Tor specifically, like before that point, I was like, oh yeah, they'd have to come up with some really good offers and we'll see. And then we went to auction and Tor came in and I was like, anything for you.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah,
was
yeah.
ridiculous. I literally was like anything for you. And I do think that there was a benefit to that as well as for like you say I'm business minded. For me, I was looking at Tor and I'm saying there's a clout that comes with being published by Tor that you can't get as an indie author, right?
Yeah.
Like you can sell as many books as you want, but no one will recognize you as a household name unless you're published by a big publisher who puts you in Barnes and Noble over and over and over again. And now I have that, which means that future books I might indie publish, right? Because like
Mm.
I got it. I got the thing I wanted, right? Like I wanted to be published by Tor and I
Yeah.
missed the indie space. I genuinely loved it. And I do feel like there's a lot of real benefits to being indie. And at this point, I have readers. They don't care they don't care what publisher is on the spine. They just care that a Rebecca Thorne book came out, right? Like
Right.
something that I will say, if you're indie and you go with a traditional deal, you will probably be locked into traditional for a little while because the contracts will say like, oh, we get first rights on your next book. We can make you an offer. I'm allowed to refuse, but I have to hand it to them before I do anything with it. And then there's like restrictions on when I could self-publish based on my publishing schedule for Tor, right? So like
Okay.
they don't want my indie books competing with anything that they're putting out. So there are clauses in the contract that we had to negotiate about when I'm allowed to indie publish and what kind of books I'm allowed to indie publish around that schedule. So there are restrictions there. So a lot of people are saying, well, are you going to go back to indie? The answer is yes, but I have to be careful about when
Hmm.
I'm allowed to go back to indie, right?
Right. Right. Because they have your quartet, the Tomes and Tea quartet, and then now they're reissuing the Gilded Abyss trilogy.
Yep.
But then, I mean, I'm guessing that maybe like if you wanted to put out an indie published romance or something like that's
Mhm.
not in that genre, that maybe that would be something you could do.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm looking into now is self-publishing serials, like Patreon style, chapter by
Mm-hmm.
chapter kind of vibe, to get that just kind of up and running and to test out a few new ideas to see what the reception would be. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm lucky enough to be at the point in traditional where the money almost is better in traditional right now. Like even with the lower royalty rate, the distribution that they offer makes the money almost better. So anything that I do decide to indie publish, I need to be very sure that it's going to be a success and like a massive success, right? And then if traditional comes back in, they're going to have to be the ones offering me that weird deal, not the royalties, or some
Yeah.
astronomical amount of money to make it worth my while, right? So like that's the balance that I'm kind of toying with now. We're
Yeah.
like, how do I? And then there's also the question of like, well, I really like my editors at Tor. How do I stay in their good favor, And I say in good favor with quotes because like we're all going to be doing what we're going to be doing, but I don't want to burn any bridges with my publisher because they've done a really good job for me for a lot of the books that I've done.
Yeah.
But I also really do enjoy having the control of my own books, right? Like, and that's nothing against them. It just is that I enjoyed being indie. I enjoyed being in that space. Because, like, the reason I sold Gilded Abyss is because it was doing very well. And it's a niche book. And I think it can have a cult following, and it already kind of does. But I feel like it was performing consistently enough that if it got the distribution from Tor, I think it's going to explode. That won't be the case for every book, right?
Right. Yeah, there's so much to navigate. And I guess maybe the point is like you can make a lot of money in traditional publishing. You can make a lot of money in indie publishing, but
Yes.
it's very hard either
Hmm.
way. Like you
Yeah.
said, you've got to have all of the things and most of all luck, or maybe not
Right.
most of all, but
Right.
luck is definitely a part of it. And timing for you, like
Hmm.
you got the timing. You were lucky enough to get the timing right. This must be a whirlwind because it's all happened just in what the past like 2 or 3 years.
2 years. Yeah. For the first time now in 2025, I got my first royalty statement, and I'm like, oh, I might actually be able to do this full time in perpetuity because my book is consistently selling. Like, I actually, Treason just ended up, and it was republished in May of 2024. It actually just ended back up on the USA Today list this week.
Wow, yeah,
Like, and that's
crazy.
crazy, right? Like, so that's the thing. Like, you can have this massive bombshell book that comes out and blows everybody out of the water, but if it's not making consistent sales, it doesn't matter. My book has outperformed many, many, many New York Times bestsellers in terms of actual sales. Like, I have over 100,000 sales for Treason alone. And that's crazy, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
most books sell like 30,000 copies or 40,000 copies and they're done. And it's because they sell really well in the first week and then they just taper out and nobody remembers that they exist. This book has selling power over time, which is way, way, way where I'd prefer to be, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
But it does mean that, like, well, how's the next one going to do, right? Will it have that same success, or
Hmm.
will it always just be like the Tomes and Teas series for me? So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how do I want to capitalize on that if that's the case, right? Like, am I going to go back to that series? Like, the purpose now is to break away from cozy fantasy and to show that I can do cozy sci-fi and like fantasy thrillers, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
not
yeah.
just cozy. Like, I'm not just a cozy author. I'm an all-around good author, right? So
Right.
so that was also another strategic business move for me, where it's like I think that these like everything becomes like a moment by moment choice, right? Like, everything
Yeah.
is me looking at what I'm getting from my publisher and getting from my audience, and then deciding where to put my energy next
And then
every
there's
time.
the like writing of the book itself, which is also not easy.
Hmm.
So, yeah. What is something that has surprised you in this whole journey, whether from traditional or indie publishing? And it could be something good or bad or one of each.
It has surprised me how the thing that surprised me, I think, the most was that in the good range was that my readers are so good at taking my mistakes and making them special editions. Like, I just like
Yeah.
every time I like when I was indie, that was such a comfort to me because the first week that I published Treason, I had a corrupted file on the ebook. So I made a copy of like I duplicated the file and fixed all the images so that I could re-upload it without the corrupted files inside and people could read it. When I duplicated it, I didn't realize that the program I was using added the word copy to the end of the title. So it was like, can't spell treason without T, copy. And
Oh
I
no.
published that everywhere and it printed in every book, right? So, like, so for the first 3 days that Treason was out, there's like 72 copies floating around that had can't spell treason without T copy on them on every other page. And someone sent me an email and they were just like, hey, I don't think this is supposed to happen. And I was like, oh my God. And I posted about it online and I
I'm
fixed
sure
it
you freaked
immediately.
out.
I freaked out and I posted about it online and was like, here's because I was documenting everything. I was like, here's a way I just messed up. Oh my God. And everyone was like, wow, special editions. And like the copies became a thing with my reader base. Like,
Oh
they
my gosh,
literally were
that's
just like,
so
oh,
sweet.
yeah. So, like, if anybody goes and buys the Waterstones versions of Can't Spell Treason Without T over in the UK, they might get lucky enough to find a copy where I wrote copy and I numbered them number one, number two, number three. Because once it got traditional, I couldn't obviously do the misprint anymore, but I could
Mhm.
still do the copy handwritten. So there are some copy still floating around, which I thought was great. And I I loved that my readers reacted that way. It made me really happy.
I can just imagine the like jolt of fear when you
The panic,
realize the
yeah, of like,
panic
oh, great,
and
yeah.
to be like, oh, look, like they're like embracing it. Like that is wonderful. So I did actually want to go back to one thing you said because I thought this was so interesting, where you said you think that the querying space might really change in the next 5 years. And I'm so curious, like, what could that look like? But I was thinking about it and like in the time that someone is querying, it could sometimes be like years that they are querying maybe multiple projects. They
Oh
could
yeah,
easily self-publish during that time and like
easily.
put all of that energy that they were spending researching agents and querying agents, and they put that energy into marketing their self-published book. I don't know. It's just I had never thought of that before, but I'm like, that is very
Yeah.
intriguing.
I think it is a bit of a tragedy that the querying space is fading. I have a lot of friends who are querying right now, and it's a struggle because self-publishing is not for everybody. So like a lot of the people who are querying because they felt like that was a better fit for them.
Right.
In a way that like maybe they don't have the time to market because they have young kids or they have an ailing family member or they're ailing or they're just not what the algorithm wants, right? Like they're
Yeah.
not pretty white
Yeah.
people. So it's like it's frustrating in that way because good books still could have gotten picked up by querying and it didn't matter what the author was doing. But we're already seeing people bridging that gap even because like like a publisher like Bindery has come in and and they're mid-level publisher trying really hard to get into, the spaces of the big five. They're doing great work, but they basically pair an author with an influencer who's already established on social media. I don't think querying will go away, but I do think we're going to start to see the percentage of people and how much energy is being put into all of those categories shifting over time.
Yeah,
So,
interesting. Yeah, and
mhm,
I interviewed a bindery author and her acquiring editor who's a book talk influencer, and I'm like,
yeah,
this is so fascinating. Like it's just
wild.
the publishing space is really changing in
Hmm.
certain ways, and it's really interesting. So, okay, well, I'm going to ask you my final question because I end every episode with a tip for the road for our
Okay.
listeners. So, do you have like one parting tip, and it can be maybe about marketing or about writing or anything else?
Find a day job that you don't hate.
Yeah.
That's my tip because I feel like the people that fail in publishing because it is so long and so hard and so competitive, they're the ones who fail because every rejection feels like a hit because they're desperate to get out of something. Right? Like they're
Right.
leaving their day job. Oh, everything in my life will be fixed if I get this publishing deal, if I get this agent, if I get this editor. And the fact of the matter is that there are so many easier ways to make money than publishing. So, like, if you're waiting for that, you're waiting for the wrong reasons. You probably should be looking at better jobs rather than spending your time hoping for this one publishing deal that's going to change your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, get a job you
Very,
don't hate.
very practical, and I 100% agree.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much. So fascinating. I literally can say that I have not talked to anyone who has had a journey like yours.
Thank
So,
you. Yeah, I was excited when you emailed. I was like, "Oh, this is a cool idea for a podcast. Like,
yeah.
what a great topic." Where is your publishing journey going to take you? No one knows. You can
Yeah,
never copy somebody else's. You just have to do the
exactly.
best you can do for as long as you can.
Thanks so much for listening to The Long Road to Publishing. All the books we discuss on the podcast can be found at my bookshop shop, the link for which is in the show notes. You can find me online on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. Even better, subscribe to my newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com and feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. The Long Road to Publishing is produced and edited by me, Eva Langston, and the intro-outro music comes from the artist's sound roll on Upbeat. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more publishing stories and more tips for the road.